name is Tim, and I'm the Palliative and Supportive Care Education Manager here at Cairns Council WA. And before I start today's episode of Keeping Up with the Pace, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Whadjuk people from the Noongar Nation, and recognise their connection to the land, waters and community. I also pay my respect to their elders and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people living and working in this area, and from whatever area you are joining us from today. Let's start the show. Today, I'm very excited to introduce Shane Bailey. Shane Bailey is a deaf doula, and most of the events that we go to for PACE around the state, we always get questions around Shane's role. So please give a warm welcome to Shane Bailey.
Thank you. Nice to be here this afternoon.
So Shane and I were talking before the podcast started recording about the experience of clinicians working in palliative care and, I suppose, in a way, creating a community around the people that we're caring for as a bit of an opportunity to support them better.
Yeah, and making use of the communities that the people actually live in, because we often don't really consider that. And so I guess from my point of view, and as an end-of-life guide or end-of-life doula or death doula, I prefer the other two terms actually, but it's one and the same thing, that we often don't consider the life of the person and the communities that they live in and what they can also offer. Yeah, so I guess I'm also come from a compassionate communities approach, which is we all have a shared responsibility to care for each other, and particularly at the time of chronic illness or end of life.
So how do you think clinicians can better support those in developing those communities around the people that we're caring for?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think what's happened to the clinical role is quite often it's so busy with the clinical demands of the clinical role and the pressures there that it can be hard for them to take a breath and see that there is actually a whole lot of, if you like, I guess you could almost term them the unseen patient, which is the family and close friends of the person that has the end of life illness. That if we can support them and look at their needs as well, it can really contribute to supporting the person through their end of life journey, because it involves everybody. I suppose we often have thought of death as a medical event, but it's actually a social event. It's something that happens to everybody. It's part of every community. There's no way we can escape it. And it actually is a normal, natural part of life. And most deaths don't need a strong or big clinical element. Some, of course, do, but most don't. And so that's where we're looking at it from a social event rather than a medical event.
Palliative and supportive care is looking at developing some education specifically in the grief and bereavement phase. And in interviewing a lot of the sites in preparation for developing this course, they all have differing amounts of involvement with the family or with the survivors of the bereaved, their immediate family around them. What's the involvement of a deaf doula post-death, post-bereavement?
Oh, post-bereavement. That can vary depending on the death doula. So because death doulas or end-of-life doulas, it's hard to say it's a relatively new profession, because there's often been people in communities since time went back that took on that sort of role. But as far as it becoming a group of people who call themselves end-of-life doulas and offer their services, their involvement post really depends on their backgrounds, their skills, their knowledge, their training. And so they sometimes can, most death doulas will actually offer to support a family and the loved ones of the person straight after the death. And that might even involve some after-death body care. And support the family if they choose to be involved in that. And it might be washing the body, dressing the body, spending time with the body. So that sort of involvement. And then some doulas, depending on, again, as I said, their skill level, will offer more support while someone's grieving or going through that process directly after grief, after the death. But I should think that really, in my own personal practice, my preference is to during the whole journey is to support the family, the person in that whole process. So literally they don't need me so much. That most people don't need specialist support to deal with grief. There are a percentage of people that, of course, do. And I feel that if I set myself up as needing to be there just because someone has died, it's basically saying that grief is something that needs to be cured, or it's not, it, I would not be working in a way that said, I can support you in being prepared for what's ahead of you, and that you don't necessarily need me. So it would be getting in the way of normalizing it, if you like, and it could lead to some sort of pathologizing of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. You hope that your services, I suppose, at the beginning, are maybe preparing them for what is a very natural stage.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And also making them aware of the supports and services that are there if they need them, and how to access them, and sometimes how to have the conversations with the professionals. Sometimes people are afraid to ask questions that they've got and speak up. So helping people see that, the only crazy question is the one not asked, really. It's best to get them out. And sometimes our professionals need you to ask them in order for them to know what you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. End-of-life doulas, where do they work, Shane?
They can work in all sorts of spaces. They can work at home, in the person's home, and they can also go to hospital with the person and be an advocate for the person in that way, and work alongside the clinical team or the hospice, wherever. So basically, it really is an arrangement between the person who has actually employed the end-of-life doula, and they would decide on how this journey looks together based on what the person really wants and what's meaningful to them and what their needs are, and then involve family and close significant others, if you like. They may also work within their communities. A lot of end-of-life doulas will hold workshops or information sessions on the role of end-of-life doulas, but also death literacy and things that that's good for people to know about around death and dying. So in order to lift the community's death literacy.
What is the reception like at these services that you go to, the hospitals, the hospices?
Yeah. That can vary. Really, in Western Australia, we have numbers of death doulas or end-of-life doulas, but we don't have a lot of really active end-of-life doulas. So, and some of that comes down to the community is curious about us, but there's not necessarily a lot of uptake. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. And it's a growing thing. And speaking on this podcast today and things like that, hopefully helps people understand a bit about the role and how they might use an end-of-life doula. But the reception, I guess it depends. I myself have have been involved in a volunteer role at the Kalamunda Palliative Care Unit for some time, not necessarily always as an end-of-life doula, but that does spill a little over to it, and so I'm well known to the staff. So it really does vary.
What sort of formal training or qualifications do you have to start practicing as an end-of-life doula?
One of the tricky things is that you don't have to have any formal training. However, there is training available. There's training that comes out of Melbourne via Preparing the Way, which is quite a good training to do. And Preparing the Way has also been heavily involved in getting a Cert 4 at TAFE in Victoria. Unfortunately, we don't have that here as yet, but hopefully one day we will. And then there are other online courses that from the UK and from the States that people do. And a couple of one or two other people who are within Australia who do provide training for end-of-life doulas. So it's not a registered profession. It's relatively new. I think there can be a degree of suspicion about it, like all things that start up as they were new. And it takes a while for the community and particularly the professionals to get it and see the value. However, when I present to professionals, half of them leave the room saying, I want to be an end-of-life doula. So the people really get it. And when you talk to people in the community, they really get it. Yeah.
And can you be registered through APRA, for example, and practice as a deaf doula?
You can. There is a registration for non-professional health workers. And it's really recommended too that you also get insurance and you have those things. If I was looking at employing a death doula for myself, I would want to know that they've got those things in place. And I'd also want to know about their training and the way they work, etc. So I wouldn't just jump in and choose somebody because they're calling themselves an end-of-life doula.
Yeah. How did you get involved in this, Shane?
Now, that's a good question. I did some online training in something quite different. And at the end of the course, the facilitator said, what are you going to do now, Shane? And I said, I'm going to become a death doula. She said, what's that? And I said, I don't know, but I better Google it. And this is true. So I think I must have heard about it somewhere and it had just been sitting in the subconscious. And so it was really after also experiencing the deaths of my mother, my father, my mother-in-law, and my uncle, and supporting those people through their dying too, that I got to understand dying. And then I became, I suppose, aware that it can be so different to what I thought it could be. And so through doing some training and being a death doula helped me further understand that. Yeah.
Do you mind, Shane, walking me through a person that you have cared for? Of course, don't give me any identifiers, but maybe be good for the audience to kind of understand what your involvement has been.
Okay. So my involvement hasn't been so much at the bedside, and mostly with the way I like to work is meeting with the family and the person and basically seeing how I can equip them to not need me, really, because I feel if I went in there and presented myself as really be needed in the space, if you like, to be constantly present, that I would be taking away from the point that death is a normal, natural process. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So one is getting a call from a daughter whose father was looking after her mother with Alzheimer's, and the Alzheimer's was reasonably advanced, but mum was still living at home. So I went and met with them, and literally I did up a living well until you die plan, and how to actually take this journey that they were on as mum's Alzheimer's was happening. And a lot of that was some of that was about self-care and looking after each other, as well as looking after her and those sorts of things. And then talking about what they perceive the dying could be like and how to journey that process together. So that's sort of one example. And then another example is meeting with a family who I got a call, and the person probably was a week away from dying and was gathering friends were gathering from the eastern states and those sorts of things. So we met around his bedside, because at this stage he was pretty much bedridden, and talked about what was happening with him, how it was for everybody, and how they would all like to be. Shared some information about Last Wish Ambulance, for instance, and that sort of thing. It's just a check in and a sort of a normalise and demystifying, and giving them some ideas of how they could be in the space and what would work for them, looking at their relationship with him and what would he like, how does he want people to be around him and to be supporting him. Yeah. So a couple of examples like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, Shane, that your involvement, you're going to be as uninvolved as you possibly could be.
Yeah.
And in a ways, you kind of want to put a bit of a framework around, or a bit of structuring around, I guess, a bit of sports. A couple of questions. Do you have any contact once the person has bereaved? Do you find out what happens to them?
Not necessarily, only at their request. They would always know to call. In the instance of the gentleman that was dying within a short time of me becoming involved, I know the son was quite keen on, making sure the mother was supported. So I let them know that I was up for that, and to give me a call, but I didn't get the call. So there is potential for that, certainly, but generally not so much as a need. Yeah.
And you mentioned a couple of times around having insurance as a good start, and then being aware of qualifications. How do you manage boundaries? How do you know when something is beyond what you should be doing? How do you regulate other people,
well, I think,
your own practice?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to be clear about your role, and that it is non-clinical. It is that non-clinical role, so that and really, I suppose I'm fortunate of being involved in the palliative care space, so I'm quite clear about what supports are out there and what their role is, and making sure that they're the people that are reached out to when they're needed. That it's not my role to, I'm not the pain management specialist, etc., etc. So it really is about being clear about that. And the other thing I think that's really important to be clear about, it's about the person and the family. It's not about what I necessarily believe should happen. I can present to them what could happen and some ideas, but really my job is to really hear about what's important to them, and how they want to take this journey, and really open it up. For one gentleman I've just come across, who lives on his own, has two sisters and a daughter in England, and doesn't know, he's lived in the house he's lived in for probably a couple of decades and doesn't know his neighbours. He was told he had 6 to 12 months to live, and so he's completely isolated. He actually has a medical background himself. He's a nurse, retired, of course, but was very, won't go near palliative care. So we had a really good chat about that, and looking at taking him to visit the palliative care unit and having a bit of a tour, and seeing what they can offer, and introducing him to the palliative care practice nurse who's there to as an outpatient provider of outpatient services, so he can bridge that gap and see the use of that. So I see that advocacy and that linking to those services, because some people get quite panicky about palliative care, and yet it has been shown time again that the quality of life someone, and the earlier that they have contact with a palliative care team, is often results in better quality of life, and often a living longer in a better way. And also that can also lead to extra support for the family as well. Yeah.
When you enter into health services, is there any expectations around things that should be escalated to them?
Gosh, when you enter into health service, things that should be
When you're supporting
escalated
someone who may be
in the
in a
service.
hospice, for example, and
Yeah,
they're having certain complaints, is there any directive from these services that these things you should be escalating immediately to a
right.
clinician?
Yeah. I should think that if the person's showing signs of discomfort and pain and distress, it might be clear that they need some clinical support to deal with that. That would be the main the main thing that I can think of that you would need to talk to. If I go into a hospital environment, I don't step into helping move the person or take them to the toilet or something like that. That's the role of the nursing staff. I might help flag with them that that's needed, but I wouldn't do those things because of the risk factor involved, etc. So, yeah, mainly those things. Yeah.
How can you support the, I guess, the culture or the spirituality of the people that you are caring for?
That's another great question, and to me, it really is to be open to the person and where the person's at and their needs, and again being in a way directed by them, and it's their journey, it's not my journey, and so quite often, you to a degree you might have to park yourself or ask for permission to bring certain things up for discussion or whatever. And I think that's really important, so that the person is in the leading role, if you like. I often think of this, and I talk about it in my compassionate communities work as well. You're a bit like a wedding planner in a way, and it's not your wedding you're planning, it's somebody else's. So, if you like a certain color scheme or theme, and it doesn't resonate with them, then it needs to be parked. It's not the appropriate one to be brought up. And so it's very much that sort of role. And I guess because we live in a death-phobic society and that death had become so medicalised, that a lot of people haven't experienced being at the bedside when someone's died and being present. And many people haven't seen a dead body. And so it's about supporting people in that process and normalising it. And also the spiritual needs, the emotional needs. It really is about conversation and being open and willing to have the conversation, but also not push it to an extent because you believe it should happen for that person in that way. You can sort of give people a little taste or bring things forward, but if they're indicating they're not up for that, then they're not up for it, and that's absolutely fine.
Sounds like you need to be really responsive.
It is about being responsive. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
You just mentioned their death phobia. Can you explain that and explore that a little bit further for me and my audience?
Right. Well, I actually found a list the other day of 101 words we use instead of dead or death. So, or phrases. And, gone to God, past, lost, gone to sleep, that so many of them that we use. And each of us to look at ourselves and think, when I hear that someone's loved one has died, do I say, look, I'm sorry for your loss, or I'm sorry that Fred has died? Are we uncomfortable with acknowledging that the person has died? So that's all part of it. The other part of it is it feeling completely unskilled or not knowing what to do to be by someone's bedside. And interestingly, having been involved in the palliative care unit at Kalamunda as a volunteer, people often just know what to do when they're by the bedside. In a lot of instances. So we do have I think, an innate knowing, and even people who were reluctant initially to be by the bedside often just fall into a nice way of being by the bedside. So we we have that that capacity within us, but we don't know we have a capacity until we actually have to use it. And if we haven't had to use it, then we can be a bit at sea with it. And so we're fearful to talk to people who've lost someone who's died. We're fearful of maybe making them cry. And yet to cry is a very normal, natural part of the process. We would like to help them feel better. So we can be uncomfortable around someone who's grieving and we just don't know what to do. Maybe the last thing we'll do is mention the name of the person or bring anything up about them or anything that might trigger a memory of them. And yet often the person who's grieving is longing for those conversations and can find it really helpful through the process. So that's all those things we struggle with are the result of our death phobia. So it interferes with our ability to talk about and be around death and dying and our trust in ourselves that we'll know how to be in that space, as well as around grieving people.
Does it ever impact you?
No, it doesn't, but it's not something I do every day of the week either. So within Western Australia, if you talk to all of the death doulas, it's only a handful of people, if that, they will support over a year. So that it's not something we're doing day to day, every day. Always a practicing death doula, or end of life doula. Another really important question is, do you work alongside another? Or do you have another end of life doula that you sort of tag team with a little bit, that you check in with, who can take over if you become unavailable for any reason or something, and that you debrief with and you have time with? So that's a really important question. So I don't think so too, because I suppose my own personal experiences of family members that have died, that it's been a very healing experience for the person who has been dying, as well as the family by the bedside as well. But I think it is really something that you have to look after yourself and be mindful and honor the work and honor the people that you serve in it. Yeah.
Do you do anything post-bereavement or post-involvement to create memories for them? Do you
I personally don't, but I know some end-of-life doulas will do that, and I think that's a great idea. One of the reasons I don't is because I'm not very crafty, even though I'm an old OT. And it used to be that OTs a long time ago did a lot of craft, but I missed out on that. So some end-of-life doulas will. It's something that I might encourage the family to do amongst themselves, to create that space, which I think is really lovely thing to do. Even during the process, I guess I had the experience personally of my mother dying as a practicing Buddhist. So I had a lot of rituals to participate in during her dying and at the time of death, and an altar to be taken care of and offerings to be made daily and changed during the process, and things that happened afterwards. So I certainly found that a wonderful experience to go through and support me and my sisters on the journey, if you like, there, and can see that we've lost a lot of that ritual, and that by creating ritual yourself, or seeing what's available in your communities, can be a good thing. In the city of Kalamunda, where I'm involved in the compassionate communities, we have a legacy lantern ceremony once a year where the community is invited to come to Sturt Park, where there's a lake, and we float lanterns on the lake where people write messages to loved ones or loved pets or experiences they've had that they may have been grieving. And we have a bit of a ceremony, and we have soup, And it happens at sunset as the sun's going down. So it's quite a lovely experience. So that's an opportunity to gather, and those rituals and ceremonies, and particularly that bring community together, show that we all have something we're grieving, and we can share that, and we can acknowledge each other. And you'll often see people who've not met come together and share their experiences and stuff. So it can be a very healing experience.
Recently, Shane, I attended a grief cafe,
Yes.
and it was a very moving experience, but you felt relief afterwards.
Yes.
It was really quite beautiful.
Fantastic.
My last question, Shane, is if someone was interested in becoming an end-of-life doula, what would your advice be?
Look, my advice would be go for it, but I would really check out the different courses that are around. I would do things like, now the name's escaping me, you might be able to help me, Tim, the online training for palliative care that's available that you can do, that's offered by, well,
there's lots available.
It comes out of one of the university, Pallilearn, and there's a few others, and I think those sorts of courses are really good to supplement your end-of-life doula training. There'll be a lot of similarities and a lot of overlap, but really look at the different courses that are around. I'm not sure whether the certificate from TAFE in Victoria is offered externally, but have a look at that, and hopefully campaign to get something similar happening here in WA. But yeah, I think it's a really worthwhile thing. The other thing is there's lots of volunteering and palliative care units and at hospices that also is a really good entree to be present in the space, if you like. So to see how you do go in this space. There's the No One Dies Alone program offered by Amana Living, where you can volunteer, which is vigiling beside people who are dying that perhaps don't have support and family. So there are some elements of that that's similar to the end-of-life doula's role. That's a great service to the community.
Thank you so much for your time, Shane.
My absolute pleasure, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Keeping Up with the Pace. We'll see you shortly. Thank you.